From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Welcome to SBI TV, a weekly show dedicated to helping you make your number. Today we're going to demonstrate how to integrate two selling organizations during a post-purchase integration. My name is Matt Shares, I'm the CEO of SBI, and I'm also your host. Returning to join me in the studio is my buddy JD Miller. JD is the Chief Revenue Officer for Motus. So JD, great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Great to see you, having completed a couple of great exits, and I feel like we've had this front row seat for your career. But not everybody who's watching knows. So maybe introduce yourself, introduce Motus, and then we'll jump into the show.
Sure. I'm JD Miller, and I'm a Chicagoan. Motus is a company that provides technology solutions to the mobile workforce. There are a lot of people who think if you've got someone who drives for work, you need to pay them 55 cents a mile. Yeah. And Motus says, actually, depending on the price of gas and how often you drive, that might be too much or too little. So we have GPS solutions that fix that problem for folks.
Huh. And how did you make the decision as you were sort of out in the market surveying opportunities and the phone was ringing? What was compelling about this opportunity for you?
You know, it was interesting. A couple of years ago, I worked for a competitor of Motus's named Runsheimer International. And so right as I was exiting the last company in early 2018, Thoma Bravo bought Motus and the competitor. And so I initially thought I was just going to come on board for a couple of weeks and do a little bit of introduction back and forth, and it turned into a CRO opportunity.
Wow. Well, congratulations. Great to have you here. So JD and I are going to unpack a show where we talk a little bit about bringing organizations together, setting culture, and what that looks like. We're going to dig into that. Before I do that, just want to make everybody aware of a couple things. Every single week, we have 2 to 3 shows that are released that you can watch that have folks like JD sharing how they're growing revenue faster than their competitors in the industry. So if you're an iPhone user, download the SBI app. You'll have access to notifications to help you on your commute, travel, maybe even your workout. Search for Sales Benchmark Index in the App Store and download it to your iPhone. So let's jump into the questions. So JD, in this first segment, you and I are going to talk about setting the right conditions when you have Org A and Org B coming together to make the new co. So kind of start us off with how do you normalize that?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting because it begins with really asking a lot of questions and listening to what you hear. Yep. These two organizations, which you would say made the same product and served the same markets, actually when you looked at them together, they did very different things. One was a very junior sales organization that did a lot of rapid transactions, high volume, very small deal size. The other company was a very senior organization that did very big dollar transactions, but just a few through the year. And so although they're serving the same market, when we looked at their pipelines, they really only had overlap in about 8% of their prospect base. Yep. So coming on board, it was really looking at what do the two organizations have in common, how are they going about it differently, and then trying to get everyone on the same page as we row in the same direction together.
So then knowing that, how do you go from having two teams to get them all excited and rallied around a single strategy? What's that process like?
Yeah, so for me, it began with a lot of listening. I began at the organization as an outside consultant who didn't have really any background or baggage from either company. And so it put me in a really nice place to be able to sit with individuals, small groups, large groups, and just ask all of the basic kindergarten questions. Like, who do you sell to? What do you do? What's the value prop? And as we started having those conversations, it's amazing that people are really candid about what's working well, what's not working well, what they wish they could do that they haven't been able to do in the past. And so at the end of about a 2-week process, I was able to come back with a vision statement that says, you know, here's what I've learned, here's where I think your next opportunities are, and you know, here's the structure I would set up going forward.
So then, knowing that, so you're listening to the team talk about the value prop, customers they serve, problems they solve, but you're also observing the team. How do you assess, now you're the Chief Revenue Officer, how do you assess the senior talent, mid-level talent, rep talent? Like, what's your process for going up and down the organization, if you will?
Yeah, great question. It's actually like conducting a new hire interview. You're looking for all of the same behaviors and all of the same leading indicators. Now, on the sales side, you have some data about past performance, and so that's a piece of the story, being able to look at, did you meet your quota, and how many quarters have you been here, and how that's working. Yep. But as you know, kind of the performance environment also can influence that. No doubt. I might be a terrible sales rep in an awesome patch, and my numbers are going to look really good. The flip side, I might be a great sales rep with no territory, and my numbers look really bad. Yep. So as you're going through the get to know you conversations, it really is conducting kind of an informal interview and asking people, how did you do that? Tell me about your process. What's working and what's not working. Yep. I think one of my favorite questions to ask is, tell me about what do you like here and what don't you like here, and tell me about what's working, what's not working. Yep. And sometimes you get answers back about I don't like the snacks in the kitchen, and sometimes you get answers back about I don't like when Matt does this, right? And you get people's names, and so that can kind of guide you down the path too of where you might need to do some more talent assessment.
So I guess last question in this segment. You're going through your listening tour, if you will, right? You're asking your questions, you're evaluating the people. How do you then determine purpose and accountability on a ground-up standpoint? Because I think the misnomer of top-down says, I've got to put this organization together with this organization. Here is the big sort of elements of our deal thesis and why we did it and all the synergies we can get and how big the market becomes and all of that. But when you boil it down, what's changing at the ground level of either that junior team interacting with new customers with a different brand and a different set of offerings, or the senior team may be becoming more transactional. How do you work through that purpose and accountability element?
Sure. Well, I think part of it is looking at best practices. As we talked about, have seen this happen in a few organizations in the past. And I talk to folks like you at SBI who work with so many companies that can tell you here's a best practice. These companies are also both owned by Thoma Bravo, who has 30 years of experience investing in tech companies, and they have some ideas about what the end state is going to look like as well. Yep. So taking those well-proven models, putting it together with the data you see on the ground, and then coming back to the organization with a vision statement that says, no matter how you were organized before, the best practice is we've got a hunting team and a farming team, and let's start looking through the individuals and seeing which skills match which roles the best. Yep. And person by person, kind of rebuilding the teams as if you were just interviewing from the start.
Yeah. All right. So JD and I are going to move from segment 1 to segment 2. And the way we're going to talk about here is, all right, now it's sort of post-purchase. I've got this integration. I got to go get some work done. I've got to really make sure that I generate all of the returns that an investor like Thoma Bravo says, this is what we think can happen. So, JD, knowing that, how do you think about the sales org structure and combining these organizations? And you said, hey, one was very junior, one was very senior. How did you determine which org structure, or how do you determine which org structure is the right one? Okay. Is it the one of the company that was doing all the big enterprise deals? The one of the company transacting? Did you go clean slate and build a brand new org structure with new reporting lines? What'd you do?
Yeah. So org structure buildup really began with having a model in mind of how I see teams organized in the first place. Okay. I've seen success a lot with hunting teams and farming teams, and the big question is, how do those interact with marketing and the lead gen folks? Are the BDRs going to sit in marketing? Are they going to sit in sales? And what's that going to look like? So really, after we assessed the talent in the organization and figured out where we've got skills and strengths, we started to get some ideas about how that might come together. Then I was able to go to the company and have sort of the CRO's vision statement that says, this is the responsibility of marketing, this is the responsibility of inside sales, this is the responsibility of outside sales, and here's how I think all of these things talk to one another. And then, kind of enrolling each individual in a place there and getting them on board with the mission and the vision and the values of the company so that they're pointed off in the right direction.
How about bringing together the pipelines?
So it was really interesting at these companies because while they said they did the same thing in the same markets, the two pipelines only overlapped by 8%. So we knew there was sort of a lead gen issue or something going on there.
I'm laughing because whenever we do so much diligence as a firm, and whenever we do it, there's synergy analysis and then there's dis-synergy analysis, and you want to answer those questions. Right, relative to that, and everyone's like, these guys are probably bumping into each other. And then you look, you're like, oh my goodness, these companies are totally coexisting in the same market with only 8% overlap.
Exactly right. So, I recruited a couple of different folks, the legacy Salesforce administrators from both sides, and then an up-and-coming leader in the organization to really head up sales operations, to then dive into what do those data tell us? What's the story behind that? And what we found is kind of the cultural go-to-market differences. You have all of a sudden a very senior selling team that's going after really big accounts, and a more junior selling team that's going after smaller accounts. And so, technically you bring the two Salesforce systems together so you have a single dashboard, but it also sort of educated us about different sets of the market, and then ultimately how are you going to organize these teams with territories and geographies and things of that nature.
And then last question in this segment, if you think about sales process, and somebody might not have one, somebody might be using a custom built one, somebody might be using bits of Challenger, somebody might be using Taz. There's all these either off-the-shelf methodologies, custom methodologies, no methodology. What do you do to standardize the actual sales process that the team is using?
Yeah. So we bring together the sales leaders, and first, again, pretending I'm that kindergartner, saying, I'm a new hire. Tell me, how would you have trained me to be a sales rep? What are your stages? How do you do deal qualification? And just kind of taking those notes. Ultimately, then I was able to line them up side to side and say, well, you both have a 5-stage sales process. You call these things different things. Actually, your stage 1 is your stage 3, so maybe there's a little shift there. And then what was really important is putting it back in a language that would be new to both organizations, because I didn't want the legacy of the past to confuse. Actually, now that this is our new methodology, and I brought my own kind of favorite stuff there too, here's what you used to call it, this is what it is now, so that we've all learned together and we can all collectively become one new Salesforce with the same kind of qualification process and stages and so on.
So what JD's describing, something I call the red wagon effect, and JD's ensuring that he doesn't do that. And what the red wagon effect says, if you think back to when you were a kid and you show up at the playground and you got your red wagon, and inside that are all your toys. People love to unpack what they've done in the past out of their red wagon and impart that on the future, as opposed to saying, I've got these two organizations that have come together. I've now got a new commercial orientation. What's the right sales process for this new combined entity that's got this wide set of offerings for these customers? And the value of what JD talked about is, I'll take the greatest from one and the greatest from the other. I've got ideas, but I still got a clean sheet of paper that ensures I've gone on my listening tour and I understand what's required. One of the top 3 mistakes chief revenue officers make when they get into a new role is the red wagon mistake that I just described. Don't do that. All right, so segment 3, our last one. JD, we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of being a CRO versus head of sales.
Okay.
Because you got the whole revenue supply chain,
absolutely,
as I like to call it, right? And it's a supply chain. You got to allocate people, money, and time against the entire thing, which includes marketing and brand and enablement. So talk a little bit about that, and almost even your history of growing up and being able to be the CRO, which is different than the CSO, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing at Motus.
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up really through the sales organization, and I thought that was difficult when you have a number that you've really got to deliver. You get in trouble if you don't. And then through my career, I got really interested in kind of lead gen and started to collaborate really closely with the marketing side of the house. And then when I learned what a CMO does, I realized the salespeople have it really easy because the CMO has such a breadth of responsibilities, from brand management to lead management, investor relations, internal communications sometimes. And it's a laundry list of responsibilities there. So really bringing those together under the CRO organization is interesting. I do it with an orientation towards, the revenue piece. So how does marketing influence revenue? How does sales play with that? And we've been talking a lot about kind of the smarketing organization, as my unofficial title is, head of smarketing, which is sales and marketing coming together.
Beautiful. How about multiple brands into one integrated brand? How do you think about that? Because folks that have historically grown up in sales, then learned marketing on a revenue orientation, don't always have a great strength relative to brand awareness, brand messaging, brand positioning. How have you unpacked that challenge?
Yeah, great question. Well, I'm fortunate enough to have a very strong marketing leader as a colleague who's teaching me the things that I don't know. For us, it's a company called Motus coming together with a company called Runsheimer. And Runsheimer was a family name. People didn't know how to pronounce it. They called it Runzenheimer and Runtimer, and the family is no longer with the business. So it was a pretty simple question for us to answer that brand goes away and we'll stick with the kind of 5-letter Motus as an easy thing to rally around going forward.
Got it. And then last question, you talked about, this revenue orientation. I'm a big believer now that the days of sales enablement are long gone. It's now revenue enablement across the entire revenue supply chain, which includes marketing, some level of business development, the hunting team, then you move into account management, customer success, and then you make that loop. So it's full revenue enablement. So as you sort of think about putting the right people in the right roles to now bring this entity together to go and drive above average growth, any sort of key learnings as the CRO as you've looked at that, as you think about the role of marketing, the role of sales, the role of enablement that sort of brought it all to bear?
Yeah, so we've spent a lot of time actually just talking about the total customer life cycle. Yeah. And again, beginning with that kind of kindergartner orientation of what's it like to be a customer here? Yeah. How did I first learn about you? What did I read from you? How did you onboard me? Once I became a customer for 2 or 3 years, what was that experience like? And we wound up putting a whole bunch of sticky notes on a big bulletin board, kind of following that customer's journey. And then that really led us into a nice conversation around, okay, so now you're in marketing or you're in customer success, what part of the journey can you most impact, and kind of translate that into KPIs and responsibilities we look at.
So what JD is talking about there is taking a grounds up approach to customer experience. Those of you that are watching and listening, if there is a trend that is sweeping revenue organizations and CEOs right now, especially in private equity owned companies, it's the concept of customer experience. It's not just good enough to deliver a customer outcome. It's also the emotional narrative of how the customer feels talking about that and experiencing that. And what JD was describing with the sticky note impact is recognizing where you have these points of leverage, right? Where in your life cycle you absolutely have to get it right? Yeah. And where you absolutely have to get it right, where you allocate, right, more labor, more technology, more horsepower, because those are those critical success factors.
Yeah, and especially in a merger or an acquisition environment, here's two companies that used to, frankly, go out to the market and kind of beat each other up and say, we've got better customer service or we've got a better technology, and here's where they have a pain point. Yeah. So when you get those folks together, they were great at talking about maybe where the other person's going to fall down a bit, but those all became then opportunities to say, okay, you've been selling against this weakness. How about we just go fix that weakness now? Yep.
Very good. All right, so JD, as always, you are always packed full of insights, and wish you the best. Appreciate you coming by and sharing some insights with the SBI audience.
Thanks for having me.
Congrats on the new role, and we are cheering for you as always.
All right,
and I want to thank you, the SBI audience, for tuning in. You guys have a choice on where you put your eyes and ears. JD and I hoped that we gave you some hard-hitting takeaways that you can go and run if you find yourself in a situation where either you're executing a transformation or bringing two organizations together. So that's it for today. I appreciate you very much. And as always, until next time, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.